So we'll begin, as usual, with reciting the prayers to help us get into a good state of mind. It's our reason, our motivation for being here. And then we'll move into the actual teachings for today. And while reciting the prayers, it's helpful to imagine the Buddha in front. And when we do visualize the Buddha, we imagine the Buddha at about the level of our forehead and a few feet or a few meters away. Made of light, the whole visualization made of light. So transparent and radiant, like a rainbow, not solid, not like our body, made of flesh, blood, bones, but made of light, so pure and radiant. And also helpful to think that the Buddha's expression is showing his love and compassion, his dedication to helping each and every one of us and all other living beings as well. So it's kind of similar to the way that a mother feels for her small child, just completely caring and dedicated and ready to help do whatever needs to be done to ensure the child is happy and well and protected from any harm or problems. So the Buddha has that kind of attitude towards us, but without any attachment, just pure unconditional love and compassion. And you can imagine other Buddhas around the Buddha, many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas around, again, looking at us with love and compassion. And if you can imagine all other living beings surrounding us, taking refuge along with us in the Buddha and receiving the benefit of taking refuge and reciting these other prayers. Okay, so the first prayer is taking refuge and then generating Bodhichitta, the altruistic intention of wanting to become enlightened for the benefit of all living beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And then the four immeasurable thoughts expands on that altruistic attitude towards other living beings, having love, wishing them to be happy, compassion, wishing them to be free of suffering, joy, wishing them to have pure happiness that's free of any suffering, and equanimity, not having any bias, but having equal concern, equal love and compassion for everyone, all living beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And then the 7-limb prayer contains 7 practices for accumulating merit or positive energy, and or purifying our non-virtue or negative karma, negative energy. So these are 2 aspects of practice that we need to do in order for our mind to actually develop and make progress along the path to enlightenment. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. And with the Mandala Offering, we imagine all the beautiful, precious, pleasing things in the world, in the universe. Imagine them transforming into a pure land, offering them to the Buddha, to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and making the wish that all living beings would be able to experience the pure land. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamneyatayami. So next we recite the mantra of the Buddha. While doing that, you can imagine light and nectar flowing from the Buddha into yourself and into all other living beings. Light and nectar purify our negative energy. That includes negative karma, our negative states of mind like greed, hatred, ignorance. And it can also purify any sickness, pain, other kinds of physical problems we may have. All this gets purified. And our positive potential, our good qualities like love, compassion, and so on, are nourished so that they can grow more and more. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Munaye Soha. 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 Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Mahamanaye Soha Tayata Om Mune Mune Mahamanaye Soha. Okay, so really try to make sure your motivation for joining this class is altruistic. If you're comfortable with the idea of becoming a Buddha to help all living beings, you can bring that into your mind and think that you're here listening to these teachings so that you can accomplish that goal of becoming a Buddha and benefiting all living beings. If you're not sure about attaining enlightenment, not yet familiar with that and not sure if that's what you want to do and are able to do, then try to have some kind of altruistic intention that you would like to learn things that will be helpful for yourself in your relationships and interactions with others. So you'll be able to bring more positive energy and be more helpful, more beneficial to others in your life and in the world around you. Okay, so let's continue. In this part of the course, which is the third and final part of this course, we are looking at the great scope of the Lam Rim. This is the third and last section of the Lam Rim, and it's all about the Bodhisattva's path, how to cultivate Bodhichitta, the aspiration to become a Buddha, to help all living beings, and then how to actually do that, what it is we need to do in order to become enlightened and help all living beings. So the Bodhisattva's path. And so in the last couple of talks, I've been talking about two methods for cultivating bodhicitta. One is called the 7-point cause and effect method. And the other method is called equalizing and exchanging oneself and others. And then there's also a way of combining those two methods into one. So we looked at that last session last week. And there was one leftover part of that I'll talk about today. It's a 9-point meditation on equalizing self and others. So if we could have the slides up. So the whole idea behind equalizing self and others is that normally we don't have that sense of being equal with others. Instead, we tend to be self-centered. We feel I am more important than others. And this isn't something that we do deliberately, consciously, but it's just our kind of instinctive, innate way of behaving. Everybody behaves that way. Everybody has that sense of I am more important than others, so my needs come first. We even feel as if I am the center of the universe. Everything revolves around me. And so that kind of attitude is a big hindrance to the Bodhisattva's path. A Bodhisattva completely reverses that kind of attitude and feels that others are more important than oneself, and just completely focuses on helping others. And this isn't an unhealthy, dysfunctional kind of focus on others, which can sometimes happen, for example, people who come from dysfunctional families where there may have been alcoholism and so on, and they develop this self-denial, and I have to take care of others, and that kind of thing can happen in an unhealthy way. So we're not talking about that. A bodhisattva has a very healthy attitude, very functional attitude, and they just realize that being more concerned for oneself than others is actually counterproductive. It's actually a source of suffering and problems rather than happiness. And so, and again, their aim, their goal is to become a fully enlightened Buddha, so that they can have all these abilities, all these qualities with which they can help all other living beings. And they realize that being self-centered, caring more for oneself than others, is a hindrance, an obstacle to the attainment of enlightenment. And so it's something that needs to be overcome. So this is the point of this kind of contemplation here, is to start by equalizing oneself with others, just to realize there's no good reason for thinking I am more important than others. Others are at least equal to myself in terms of importance. So there's this 9-point meditation that apparently comes from Trikung Rinpoche, and it is included in the book that we're following, The Easy Path. And it's also something the Dalai Lama teaches. So I was trying to find some source, like where did Trikung Rinpoche get it from? And I couldn't find any. I don't know if it's something he created himself or he got it from somewhere. I don't know. Anyway, for anyone who's not familiar with the name Trikung Rinpoche, he was the junior tutor of the Dalai Lama. He passed away, I don't know when, maybe in the 80s or 90s. So anyway, he was one of the important teachers of the Dalai Lama. And the Dalai Lama says, from Trikung Rinpoche, he mainly learned the Lam Rim. Trikung Rinpoche was his main teacher for the Lam Rim teachings. Okay, so anyway, there are 9 points in this meditation, and they're divided into 3 groups of 3. The first 2 groups are related to conventional truth. They're from the perspective of conventional truth. The last 3 are from the perspective of ultimate truth. So we'll go through these one by one. So the first group, these first 3 points contain reasons related to others. So the first one says, every being's wish to be happy and free from suffering is the same. So there's no basis, or we could say no reason for discriminating among them. So this is something to contemplate, something to ask ourselves. Everybody, every being, human beings, as well as other beings, animals, and so on, all have within themselves, within their mind, this wish to be happy, to have what they need, like food and clothes and shelter and comfort and safety. And everyone has that wish. And nobody wants to suffer. Nobody wants pain. Nobody wants to be mistreated, abused, harmed in any way, and so on. So everyone has this. It's something we all have in common. And so is there any reason why one being's wish to be happy and free of suffering is more important than another's? So a little voice inside of us says, yes, my need for happiness is more important than others. So if we're honest, I mean, we might not want to admit that because we may feel ashamed of it, but we do feel that way. I am more important than others. But that's our self-centered attitude, our selfishness talking. It's not wisdom. It's not compassion. It's not altruism. It's self-centeredness. So if we use wisdom, then we can understand that, well, everybody else feels the same way as me. So what makes me more important than others? Yeah. Do I have more right to be happy than anyone else? So if we ask ourselves that reason or that question, then difficult to come up with any reason for that. But unfortunately, people do have this attitude, and many people in the world never look at it, never question it. They just go along with it. And it can lead to terrible things. For example, stealing other people's possessions, even killing them, because of thinking that person is interrupting my happiness. That person is in the way of my happiness, my needs, what I want. And so then they use that to justify killing, destroying the life of another person, another being, or stealing their possessions, or cheating them. We have high level forms of cheating, such that the gap between the rich and the poor is widening all the time. Some people made billions of dollars from the pandemic, while other people lost their homes, lost their jobs, and struggling just to survive. And for me, it's hard to understand how this can happen, but it does. How people can justify using their power, their position, their wealth to rack up more money for themselves. And in the meantime, so many others are dying. Every day, every minute, there are people dying of starvation. They just don't even have enough food to eat. And then there's millionaires spending billions of dollars buying yachts for themselves, or flying to the edge of space just for the thrill of it. Anyway, I won't go off on that, but I think these are some examples of how the self-centered attitude can operate in our mind and justify actions that we do, which are self-centered and ignoring others, and sometimes even harming others. So is that right? Anyway, number 2 says, if 10 hungry beggars come to your door looking for food, there is no reason to discriminate among them. So it'd be helpful to actually imagine this kind of scene, maybe not coming to your door, but maybe you're working in a food bank, you're volunteering in a food bank, and there's a line of people outside the door needing food. I mean, I don't think people go to a food bank unless they really need food. There's probably some shame, some stigma involved in that. And so all the people who come there are in need. And so would it be right to discriminate and say, okay, I'm going to give you food, but not you. I don't like the way you look. I'm not going to give you any food. So that would be terrible. And I'm sure if we did something like that, we would, when we go home and try to go to sleep at night, we'd probably have a hard time going to sleep, thinking about the way we behaved, turning away somebody who was hungry. So in a similar way, all sentient beings want happiness. And they don't have, of course, they have a certain amount of happiness, but they are deprived of genuine happiness, the happiness of liberation, the happiness of enlightenment, these higher forms of happiness, which are genuine, long-lasting forms of happiness. So sentient beings, ordinary beings, are deprived of that. They don't have access to those kinds of happiness. And so in that way, they are like hungry people, hungry beggars, starving for genuine happiness and peace and freedom from suffering. So if we think in that way, does it make sense to discriminate and say, I'm only going to help these people, but I'm not going to help those people? Third one is kind of similar. It says, among a group of people who are sick, there's no reason to discriminate and provide medicine to some and not to others. So doctors actually have an oath that they have to take care of any person who is in need of medical attention. And if they don't do that, they can lose their license to practice. So, we think about this, it would be wrong to refuse to provide medicine to somebody who's sick and in need of medical treatment. So this analogy relates to the fact that all sentient beings are sick with delusions, afflictive emotions, greed, hatred, ignorance, jealousy, and karma. So we are all afflicted with these causes of suffering. So in a way, we are all sick. And so we all need help. Everyone needs help equally. And so would it be right to discriminate and say, I'm going to help this group of people, but refuse to help those people? So these are things to think about that can help us overcome self-centeredness and also the tendency to discriminate, to have a biased attitude and be more concerned about some than others. Okay, so then there's next 3 points are also from the perspective of conventional truth, but they contain reasons related to oneself. In other words, understanding our own situation in relation to others. The first one says, we have received immeasurable kindness from every being and will continue receiving it in the future up to enlightenment. So here we're thinking about how we have received kindness from others, and not just some living beings, but all living beings. So we looked at that earlier in the 7-point cause and effect method. One of the points there was that all living beings, every living being has been our mother in our past lives. There's nobody who hasn't been our mother. And they even say, each being has been our mother numerous times. And that means they gave birth to us. They looked after us when we were small and helpless. So we received this incredible kindness from each and every living being. And then on top of that, we also looked at how other living beings provide us with, like just in this lifetime, the food that we eat, even water, other kinds of drinks we need to stay alive, and shelter where we live, the clothing we wear, shoes, furniture, electronic devices, and so on. Everything we have in our life, everything we own, everything we use, everything we enjoy, like entertainment, music, and so on, all of that comes from others, other people. Work to produce these things and make them available for us. And so you could spend hours contemplating this, looking at all the examples of what we receive from others, what others do for us. And it's like, wow, mind-blowing. And so, so this really helps us to open up our hearts, our minds to others and appreciate their kindness, feel gratitude, and then naturally want to help them in return. So this has been true up until now, but also in the future, as we continue to exist in this life and in our future lives, we will also continue receiving kindness from other living beings. And not only in terms of material things like food and clothes and and so on, but also for our practice, our Dharma practice. If we wish to follow the path to enlightenment, we actually need other sentient beings because they are the objects in relation to whom we cultivate compassion, love, altruism, and also like the 6 perfections of generosity, ethics, patience. So we can't do those practices, we can't develop those qualities without other beings who are the objects in relation to whom we cultivate those qualities and do those practices. And so we actually need them in order to become enlightened. This is very humbling to contemplate, instead of, I'm going to become enlightened to help all living beings, as if we are somehow superior to others. But actually, we are totally 100% dependent on others for everything, both in terms of our physical and material needs, our emotional needs, and also our spiritual needs. It's impossible to attain enlightenment without other sentient beings. We need them. So that really helps to cool down our arrogance and increase our appreciation of others and our compassion for others. So again, there's no reason to discriminate among others because everybody is important. Everybody is helpful for us. And then number 5 says, sentient beings have also harmed us, but their kindness outweighs the harm. So this is interesting because we might come up with the thought, yeah, okay, sentient beings have been helpful to me, but they've also harmed me. That's true. Just in this lifetime, we've received harm from others, but also in our past lives, we've been killed, we've been tortured, we've been beaten and raped and abused and lied to and so on and so forth. So it's also true that we have received harm from other sentient beings. However, the text says, but if you weigh up the amount of harm we've received and the amount of benefit we've received from others, the benefit outweighs the harm. So there's more acts of kindness and help and benefit coming from others than there is acts of harm. So that's something to think about, for example, just in this lifetime. I think we can all say that we've had more acts of kindness given to us than acts of harm. Another thing is, does it do any good to think about the harm? If we let our minds dwell on that, contemplate that, meditate on that, what will that do? Yeah, it'll just increase anger, hostility, resentment, unhappiness. So does that do any good? Is that going to be beneficial for our mind, especially if we want to attain higher states of mind like liberation and enlightenment? On the other hand, by contemplating the kindness, what others have done for us, what they do for us, and what they will do for us in the future, the result of contemplating that is opening our heart and feeling love and compassion and all these other wonderful qualities. And then, of course, the aspiration to become enlightened, to help them. So there's many benefits, many good results of contemplating their kindness. So that's another thing you can think about. What will be the result of thinking about the harm versus thinking about the kindness? Also, when those times when they did harm us, why did that happen? You can think about how beings' minds are under the control of delusions, ignorance, hatred, anger, and they don't really know what they're doing. They're like people, they're crazy, mentally ill, and they're creating suffering for themselves when they do harmful things. And the suffering they will experience as a result of their harmful actions is probably much greater than the suffering we experience being the recipients of their harm. So these are just a few thoughts. Shantideva talks a lot about this in chapter 6 of his text, Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. So after reading those verses and contemplating them, it's difficult to find any good reason to hang on to resentment and anger towards anybody, any living being. Then number 6 says, since oneself and others are all subject to death, there's no point in discriminating against anyone or holding grudges. So here we're asked to think about how we are all going to die. Our life is very impermanent. It's going to end at some point. And the same is true for everyone else, all the other sentient beings. We are all in this situation of dying and being reborn again and again and again. And thinking about that can really help us to let go of any kind of resentment or grudges that we may have. This kind of thing happens naturally when a group of people collectively are experiencing some difficult situation. It kind of brings them together. This happened in the early days of the pandemic. I think it faded after a while, but in the beginning of the pandemic, there were so many acts of kindness. People were thinking about their neighbors and, an elderly person in the neighborhood who was stuck at home and had difficulty getting groceries or whatever, and they just do these acts of kindness, cook meals for them. And people would get in touch with their long lost relatives that they hadn't been in touch with for years. So there was a lot of compassion, a lot of altruism in the beginning of the pandemic. I think it's just something that happens naturally when we're facing a difficult situation collectively with other people. It can bring out the best in us. It can really bring out altruism and compassion and kindness. So I think that's what's being addressed here, that tendency. So if we really think about how oneself and all the other beings in samsara, we're all in this situation of samsara, which is like a prison, like an ocean. They sometimes say it's like an ocean filled with all kinds of dangers and terrible things. So we're all in this ocean, trying to stay afloat, trying to get to safety, trying to get out of the situation. So given that, does it make any sense to have hostility and negative feelings towards anybody? Okay, then the last 3 points are from the perspective of ultimate truth. And the book, The Easy Path, says that this involves recognizing how the idea of there being truly lasting friends or enemies is just imputed by our mind and doesn't correspond with reality. So we have the tendency to look at another person and see them as either a friend, someone who's great, wonderful, or an enemy, someone who's horrible, or a stranger, someone we don't care about. And we tend to see these relationships as fixed, carved in stone, permanent. They will always be that way. They will never change. And this is actually not true. It's wrong. Because relationships do change. People do change. Feelings change. And so there's no such thing as a permanent, eternal friend or enemy or stranger. And saying that these are ultimate, they are related to ultimate truth. I mean, normally ultimate truth means emptiness of inherent existence. And in The Path to Bliss, which is the Dalai Lama's commentary to this text, The Easy Path, there he actually says that here the word ultimate does not refer to ultimate truth in terms of emptiness. It just means that the outlook here is more profound or more ultimate than the first 6 points. The first 6 points were very much kind of conventional, whereas this is kind of going more in the direction of the ultimate truth. And in fact, the reasons given here are not actually reasons that prove emptiness, but they just are taking us in that direction. They are helping us go towards ultimate truth. So let's look at these points. Number 7 says, there are no inherently existing friends or enemies. If there were, the Buddhas would perceive them, but they do not. So inherently existing means like intrinsically from their own side, independent of everything else. So we do have this tendency to see everything in that way. We see everything as if it was inherently or intrinsically existent, starting with our own self, and then also with others, people we like, people we don't like, people we are indifferent to, and all the other things in the world. Everything appears as if it's existing on its own, inherently, independently. But that's false. That's also a false appearance, a mistaken appearance. And normally we just believe in it, buy into it, go along with it. And that's how we get into all the trouble that we have. So we have to overcome this tendency to see things as inherently existing and realize they're actually empty of existing in that way. But that's quite difficult to understand. And here the reason isn't that difficult to understand. So, but it's helping us go in that direction. So it's saying if there were real inherently existing friends and enemies and strangers, then the Buddhas would perceive them that way. But in fact, they do not. So it may be difficult for us to know because we may not have a Buddha living next door to us that we can knock on their door and ask them, you know, that guy across the street who's driving me crazy, what do you feel about him? Do you see him as an enemy and get annoyed with him? So we may not have that chance to actually talk to a Buddha, but what it says in the teachings is that in the mind of a Buddha, and from the perspective of Buddha, there are no friends, enemies, strangers. A Buddha has perfect equanimity, perfect love, perfect compassion, equally towards every living being. A Buddha sees everyone, every being, as equally deserving of love, compassion, kindness. They don't reject anybody. So that's how Buddhas see sentient beings. And I find that helpful. That does help me when there's somebody who really annoys me, and I just think, how could anybody like that person? What does people see in that person? It's really hard for me. So then I try to imagine, how a Buddha would see that person, how that person appears in the mind of a Buddha. And that helps me shift my perspective, get out of my kind of way of thinking. And how, Buddha sees everyone as deserving of love and compassion, mainly because they see everyone's potential. They know that everyone has the potential to change, to transform, to develop good qualities, and even become fully enlightened. Buddha can see that. And so Buddha knows nobody's a hopeless case. Nobody deserves rejection, to be rejected and, thrown out. Okay, so that's one way of thinking, how a Buddha sees all the other living beings. And there's no such thing as a friend or enemy or stranger to a Buddha. And then the next one, number 8, says, if there were permanent, truly existing friends, enemies, and strangers, then such relationships would never change. But in fact, they do change. So here we're just looking at our own experience. And we do tend to feel, with regard to a friend, someone we like, someone we're close to, someone who's precious and important to us, we do tend to feel like that relationship is permanent. It will always be that way. It will never change. I mean, this is wishful thinking, but it's not definite. I'm sure we've all had experiences in our life of having that kind of relationship with somebody, and then it did change for various reasons. Maybe that person did something horrible and, you know, we just couldn't get along with them anymore, or I don't know, there's various reasons, various things that can happen that cause such relationships to dissolve. And they might even turn into an enemy. That person who was once so dear to us, we felt such love for them, they were so important in our life, and then they go to the other side, they become an enemy, somebody we can't stand. Just the thought of them brings so much pain in our heart. We don't want to have anything to do with them, talk to them, think about them, or anything like that. So I'm sure we've all had those kind of experiences. So that shows a friend isn't permanent. It's just because of causes and conditions that somebody becomes a friend. And the same with enemies. You know, at one point in time, a particular person might be someone we can't stand, and we don't want to have anything to do with them. But things can change. You know, maybe we find something in common, or that person helps us one day, or we just start to see good qualities in them, and then we feel good towards them, and they may even become a friend. And then strangers can go either way. They can turn into friends, they can turn into enemies. So that's really helpful to contemplate how relationships do change within one lifetime. We can see that with our own experience. And they also say, but from one life to a next, that kind of thing happens. Somebody who was an enemy in one lifetime can be a friend, a dear or relative, a dear sibling, a twin even, in another lifetime, and vice versa. Someone we're very close to in one lifetime, in another lifetime can become an enemy. So this is said in the teachings that we go in and out of these relationships with others. So they're not permanent. There's no permanent, truly existing friend or enemy or chain or stranger. Third one says, clinging to permanent, truly existing friends and enemies is like clinging to ideas of this side and that side of a mountain. So yeah, such labels change depending on our viewpoint. So what that means is if you're standing on one mountain and looking over the valley at another mountain, then you feel this mountain and that mountain. But if you cross over to the other side of the valley and then you're standing on that mountain, looking back where you were before, then you would think differently. Now that mountain becomes this mountain, and this mountain becomes that mountain. So, we give labels to things just according to our perspective, where we are. And this happens with people as well, with relationships. So it's just depending on circumstances that we call somebody a friend or an enemy or a stranger. One time I was leading the Equanimity Meditation with a group of people. That's the one where you imagine a friend, an enemy, and a stranger, and then you kind of contemplate these different points. And after the meditation, we were discussing it in the group. And one woman said that she put her husband in all three places. And I thought, wow, she's really smart. That's really perceptive, because it's true. The same person at certain moments, that person can be our dearest friend. We feel so warm and loving and caring towards that person. But then at another point in time, that person can be like an enemy if they're doing something annoying, or they don't do what we want them to do, or whatever. We're in a conflict with them or angry at them. And at that moment, that person becomes an enemy. Same person. You're the same, the other person's the same, but your perspective has changed because of causes and conditions. And there may be also times when that person becomes a stranger, like if you're really busy doing something and you have a deadline, you have to finish, and that person may be over there somewhere, but you just have no awareness of them. They're just not important at all at that moment. So your feelings towards them would be indifferent. So these are really helpful to contemplate, to kind of break down our usual concepts and our usual feelings and attitudes towards others, and putting them into these boxes of friend, enemy, stranger. That there's no such thing as a permanent, truly existing friend or enemy or stranger. So again, this is part of the meditation to develop bodhicitta. This is one of the first steps we need to do to equalize our feelings towards others and stop discriminating them, and also stop thinking I am more important than others. And then we work from there on developing more love and compassion and cherishing of others and so on. Okay, so now to move on, the next part of the book talks about the Bodhisattva vow. And so traditionally, when a person has developed bodhicitta, and it does take time, one does need to meditate on the points in the meditation again and again and again and again, getting more and more familiar with those points, until bodhicitta is something that arises in our mind. In the beginning, it will arise in a contrived way, in a forced way, sort of artificial way, but gradually, eventually, it just starts to arise by itself, natural, uncontrived. So traditionally, it's said that when you have develop bodhicitta, especially in that uncontrived, natural way, that's the point at which you become a bodhisattva. Bodhisattva, someone who has natural, uncontrived bodhicitta. And at that point, one takes and keeps the bodhisattva vows. So traditionally, in the texts in the past, that's how it's explained, that you only take the bodhisattva vows after you have generated uncontrived bodhicitta. But it seems that nowadays people take the bodhisattva vows even when they're just still trying to develop bodhicitta. I was thinking about my own experience. I went to India and I was learning Buddhism at the Tibetan library in Dharamsala. And I was such an eager, enthusiastic student that after just a few months of starting to learn Buddhism and the path to enlightenment, there was an opportunity to take bodhisattva vows. And I said, yes, I want to do that. I want to become a Buddha to help all living beings. I'll take these vows. So yeah, I was really new. But yeah, I think it is good to really think carefully about taking vows before you do that, because it is a big commitment. And so one should be really sure that this is what you want to do. And it's also important to learn the vows, to read them, study them, make sure you understand them before you take them on. So there are two sets of vows. The first is called aspiring bodhicitta. So there's two kinds of bodhicitta, which I mentioned before. Aspiring bodhicitta is when you have the wish to become a Buddha, to help all living beings. And so there's a set of vows, or actually precepts, related to aspiring bodhicitta. And those precepts are actually mentioned in the book, The Easy Path, page 199 and 200. So basically, there's kind of two sets. One set of precepts is to prevent bodhicitta from degenerating in this lifetime. That includes things like just remembering on a daily basis the benefits of bodhicitta, and renewing your bodhicitta every day, reciting some verses to renew your aspiration to become enlightened, and to not give up working for sentient beings, no matter what they do, even if they're really annoying. You don't give up on them. And you also need to accumulate what are called the two collections of merit and wisdom. That's mainly in the six perfections, which we're going to look at later. And then there's also two sets of precepts, like two sets of 4 precepts that are sort of complementary. And those are to prevent being separated from bodhicitta in our future lives. So realistically, it takes many lifetimes to reach enlightenment. So we want to make sure that in our future lives, we will continue to have the chance to meet with teachers and teachings and be able to continue on this path, developing bodhicitta, following the bodhisattva's path, and so on. So to make sure we can meet bodhicitta again in the future and continue practicing it, then there's certain precepts. There's 4 things that we should do, 4 things we should avoid. For example, we should avoid telling lies to our spiritual teachers, deceiving them in any way. And the things we should do are to just try to be honest and straightforward and genuine in all of our actions and interactions as we can. So I'm not going into detail with those. You can read them in the book. And then for engaging bodhicitta is when you're actually making effort towards enlightenment, doing the things you need to do in order to reach enlightenment. So you're actively involved in following the bodhisattva's path. So on that level of bodhicitta, there is quite a few vows or precepts. There's 18 root downfalls and 46 secondary precepts. And they're not mentioned in this book. You can find, if you're interested, there's other sources of information on the FPMT website. You can just type in Bodhisattva vows, and I'm sure you can find information there. And again, like I said, it's good to study them, understand them before actually taking them. And when you do get to the point of wanting to take them, it's taken in a ceremony with a teacher. I'm not sure if this can be done online or not. It's possible, depending on the teacher. Actually, the Dalai Lama, when he gives public teachings, he will sometimes give the full set of bodhisattva vows at the end of the teaching. Sometimes he just gives the aspiring bodhicitta vows. And I think that's been happening online as well. A few of the online teachings I have watched with His Holiness, at the end of the teaching, he'll give at least the aspiring bodhicitta. So, and then after taking the vows in a ceremony, you need to renew them every day. That's part of the commitments, is to recite verses, which are actually in the book, verses to renew your commitment to follow the bodhisattva path to enlightenment, to help all living beings. So then the actual practices for becoming a Buddha are included in the 6 perfections. So that's the next topic. And here's a list of the 6 perfections. We'll go through them one by one. generosity, ethics, patience, joyous effort, concentration, and wisdom. And Gyurme Khyentse Losung Jampa in the book also mentioned these 6 noble factors when one is practicing any of the 6 perfections. Then it needs to be done together with these 6 noble factors. This isn't something he made up, but it's actually in Lama Tsong Khapa's great Lam Rim Chenmo, and it's probably coming from text by a Sangha and so on. So just briefly, noble reliance means having the motivation of bodhicitta. When you're practicing generosity, ethics, and so on, it needs to be done with the motivation of bodhicitta. And that's actually what makes it a perfection. When we talk about the perfection of generosity, it's different than ordinary generosity. Ordinary generosity is just giving to another person, another being. Whereas the perfection of generosity is when you give with the motivation of bodhicitta. So you may be giving food to an animal, but you're thinking, I'm doing this in order to become enlightened so that I can help all living beings, relieve their suffering and give them happiness. So it's a much vaster awareness as to why you're doing these practices. What is your reason, your purpose for doing these practices? And then number 2, noble entity. So this means when you're doing any of these practices, you do it in an excellent way. For example, with generosity, when you give, you should try to give things that are good quality and not just your old clothes and things you don't want anymore. I mean, of course, it's fine to give those as well. But, Bodhisattva also wants to give really good quality things to people. Things that will really make them happy and benefit them, and so on. So yeah, doing these 6 practices in the best way possible. Number 3, noble purpose is benefiting all living beings. So even if you're helping just one person or a small group of people, but your real intention or purpose is to benefit all living beings, because you've been working on developing equanimity and equalizing self and others. So you've kind of overcome the tendency to have bias and discrimination. So you want to help all living beings. And also, your purpose is to help them not just in this moment, right now, with their present needs, but in a long-term way. You're thinking of helping them emerge from samsara, emerge from suffering, reach liberation, reach enlightenment. So you have a very vast vision of the kind of help that you want to give to living beings. Number 4 is called noble, skillful means. So this means that when you do any of the 6 practices, like generosity, you do it with an understanding of emptiness. So, of course, we have to first study emptiness, and that's the 6th perfection, the perfection of wisdom. So we'll get to that. But a bodhisattva does know about emptiness. And so when they're practicing any of the 6 perfections, for example, generosity, they're doing it within an understanding of emptiness. So they would be thinking, okay, the I who is giving doesn't exist inherently, independently, is empty of that kind of existence. The person or being I'm giving to is also empty of existing inherently. The gift I'm giving, or the act of giving, this exchange that's happening between myself and the other person, that is also empty of existing inherently, independently. They call that the 3 spheres. There's 3 aspects involved in any action we do. There's the doer of the action, the object of the action, and then the action itself. So there's always those three parts, three aspects of an action. So Bodhisattva would be doing an action without awareness of the emptiness of inherent existence of those three spheres. It's quite hard to do, of course, but with training, then when it does get to the point where one can do it. So that's the meaning of number 4, skillful means. And then number 5, noble dedication, means that whatever virtuous action you do, any of the 6 perfections and so on, you dedicate the merit of that to enlightenment. By the merit of this act of giving, may I become a Buddha to benefit all living beings. And number 6, noble purity, is keeping the mind free of selfishness, self-grasping, and other afflictive emotions. So while doing an act of generosity, for example, giving, then you are really careful about your mind and your attitudes, your thoughts, and keeping your mind free of any kind of negative thoughts. For example, arrogance or pride. Oh, I'm such a generous person. Or maybe resentment if the other person doesn't show sufficient gratitude for your gift. That's scary. We have to be careful about that, you know. Sometimes when we give, we expect the other person to thank us, to look grateful, to do what we want them to do, and so on. And then if they don't, we can feel annoyed at them, and we might even regret giving to them. Maybe give me that back, you know, you don't deserve this gift. So we have to really watch our mind and look out for these kind of unwholesome attitudes that can creep in and make the act of giving impure. So that's the meaning of noble purity. Really trying to keep our mind, our attitude, our motivation as pure as possible. So it's hard, you know, to really practice these 6 perfections. But this is what a bodhisattva does and what a bodhisattva needs to do. All these things are enabling the bodhisattva's mind to become more and more pure and more positive, and eventually become a fully enlightened mind of a Buddha. Okay, so we're running short on time, but let's just look at the next slide. We're starting to look at the perfections individually. So the first one is the perfection of generosity. Sometimes it's called giving or charity. I'm just using the term in the book, generosity. So what is it? Generosity is the thought wishing to give away one's body, possessions, and merit, plus acts of physical and verbal giving done with this motivation. So this is kind of a general description of generosity. So it's mainly a thought, an attitude, wanting to give, because it's not always possible to give. For example, Milarepa. Oh, what happened to my video? It's gone all fuzzy. Okay, that's better. Milarepa or other yogis who lived in caves in the mountains, and they had nothing, almost nothing, even for their own survival. And so they weren't able to do much in the way of physical giving. Not like they didn't have wealth and other material things they could give to others. So even if you're in that kind of situation, you can still practice giving, practice generosity with your mind. And in fact, that's what we do when we practice Tonglen, taking and giving. We generate this wish to give, and we even visualize giving all kinds of nice things to other people, to other beings. So even on the mental level, one can practice generosity. So even if you are impoverished and you don't have much to give, or you don't have nice things to give, you can still develop that genuine, sincere wish to give and do it on the mental level, visualizing. But if you do have wealth, if you do have materials, you shouldn't think, oh, I don't have to give these away. I can just give mentally. I can just visualize giving. And in that way, justify hanging on to your wealth and your things and not actually giving them with miserliness. So if we do have things to give, we should give them. We shouldn't cling to them with attachment and with miserliness. And so that's why it says, in addition to having this wish to give, then doing acts of physical and verbal giving. Verbal is because one type of giving is the giving of Dharma, giving of teachings. So we don't have time to go into the details. We'll do that next week. We'll go into the details of the three types of giving: giving teachings, giving fearlessness, giving material things. There was just one other thing I wanted to mention. Oh yeah, the book. Oh no, okay, I'll leave that for later. So anyway, that's a general introduction to that first perfection of giving or generosity. And the order of the perfections is according to ease, the easiest ones to practice. So generosity is the easiest one to practice. It's not as difficult as some of the later ones. Most people do practice giving, practice generosity. I mean, we give gifts, birthday presents, Christmas presents, and so on. It's very much part of our culture to give. But often our giving isn't so completely pure and altruistic. But we can work on that by paying attention to our mind and our recognizing which aspects of the mind are helpful and which ones are not, and then working on making our attitudes more and more positive and sincere, unselfish, altruistic, and so on. Okay, so we'll stop there. If we could just see the next slide, this is for next week. If you could read the next few pages, 206 to 212. So that's the perfection of giving, perfection of ethics, and patience. I may not get all of that done next week, but I'll do as much as I can. And then for the meditation, if you could meditate on loving kindness, which is the next step in the sevenfold cause and effect method. That's a really beautiful meditation for someone you are close to, and then a stranger, and then finally a difficult person. So, and then if you have time, you could also contemplate those 9 points that we went through today. Those are quite juicy and meaningful to contemplate. So we'll stop there and make a dedication of the merit, the positive energy we've created during this session. So just as at the beginning, we generated the altruistic intention to benefit all living beings. So now let's share the merit, the positive energy we've created with all living beings, wishing it will bring them peace and happiness and ultimately enlightenment. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel Bodhichitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Then the long lives of our teachers, His Holiness Lama Zopa Rinpoche. We can also think of all other teachers May they all live long. Incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-fulfilling, wish-granting jewel, source of every benefit and happiness in this world. May you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three sublime ones, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. So thank you very much for joining, and wish all of you well, and see you next week. And thank you, Venerable Dundrup, and everyone at Thubten Norbuling for organizing this class. Take care.
Thank you, Venerable Khadro.